Yes, okay. So the recording has started. Once again, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today at the weekly seminar of ICSS, the Institute of Cybersecurity for Society, University of Kent. I am Sanjay Bhattacharya. I am lecturer at the university and a member of ICSS. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Reetika Khera. Reetika is Associate Professor in Economics at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. She is a development economist working on social policy. Currently, she's also serving as Associate Dean at IIT Delhi. Uh, in 2018, Reetika edited the volume Dissent on Aadhar, Big Data Meets Big Brother. Today's seminar is based on the book as well as some fresh thoughts that Reetika is currently working on. Some of the contributors to the book are here with us today, so we are looking forward to an engaging session. Over to you, Reetika. You may want to put the presentation in full screen mode, but this is fine as well.
Yeah, just let me do that. Okay. So thank you for inviting me, first of all, to do this talk, and also to all those the contributors who have joined. One of the reasons why I did reach out to some of the people who already know a fair bit about what I'll speak today is because, as Sanjay was saying, there was some new material. And really, I'm airing these thoughts for the first time, so I feel a little bit hesitant also to speak about it, but I'm doing it anyway because I think feedback would be really helpful. It's a bit complicated when some people are very familiar with the project and some people may not be entirely, may not even have heard of it. So I'll try to do a broad brush kind of description of the project and why we think it's problematic. And then in some bits, I'll try to go into a fair bit of detail just to give you a sense of just how bad things are from our perspective. And then in the end, I'll talk a little bit about these new thoughts, which basically are related to the data protection law that is being discussed in India. It's supposed to be tabled in this session of Parliament here. And I'm not necessarily, I'm like, this is not my natural kind of field of study because like Sanjay said, I'm a development economist and very much interested in welfare, in the welfare state and welfare policies in the country. And that's how I got interested in Aadhaar. But the interest in Aadhaar then led to thinking much more about big data and data mining, and therefore also about these data protection policies. So I'll start, like I said, with some of the material that is covered in the book. And for those who are not familiar, Aadhaar is a unique number for all residents. It's supposed to be a unique number. Biometrics are supposed to guarantee the uniqueness of the number. And what they use is fingerprints, all three things: fingerprints, iris scans, and photographs. Since Usha is there, I should add that biometrics are not quite an exact science as they are projected to be, hugely problematic, not only from the point of view of uniqueness, but also from the point of view of just use. And then, of course,
Reetika, we are not able to see the slides. So if you could please share them.
Is this better?
No, so we are not able to see the slides at all. So you need
to hang on. You're seeing me?
Yes.
Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay, yes. So I'm not making it full screen. I'll just keep it like this.
That is fine.
Yeah. Hopefully you shouldn't have trouble reading the material. Yeah. And this is just the first slide after the title slide, so you didn't miss anything. Okay, so I'll go ahead. To get Aadhaar, to get an Aadhaar number, there was supposed to be, so a lot of this is in theory, and then I'll talk about the actual practices. So there were supposed to be three ways of enrolling. You come with an existing ID, a proof of ID, and a proof of address, and you can enroll on the basis of that. There's supposed to be an introducer system for those who don't have proof of ID and proof of address. The NPR, the National Population Register, that was initially being done through the Census of India office, was a third route to enroll. And actually, that is the route I think that I used. So that's how I know about it, but that's not the most commonly used. And basically, what you get is this number, which is supposed to be unique. And in fact, when they were selling the project, it was made out to be as if most Indians, or a very large number of Indians, did not have any existing IDs. But as you know, we filed an right to information application, through which we learned that the bulk of the people who got an Aadhaar number got it through the first route, which is by giving an existing proof of ID and proof of address. So it's now not a new project anymore. It was initiated by the previous political dispensation in 2009-10, and initially it was projected as being something that would be voluntary, and this is one of the most contentious issues. Even today, we are fighting this voluntary and mandatory battle. In 2010, through an executive order, the authority was put in place without any regulatory framework. Within 2 years, it was challenged in the Supreme Court, and some restraining orders were issued, but these orders have by and large not been implemented by the government. They've not been honored by the government. The initial orders were about keeping it voluntary. But in fact, like I said, over that 2010 to 14 period, it was slowly and surreptitiously made de facto compulsory for a whole range of things, range of services and welfare benefits provided by the government. That was the period of still the previous political dispensation headed by the Indian National Congress Party. And at that time, the BJP, the current political party in power, was opposing it. When they came to power in 2014, they quickly did a U-turn and they became, I think, even more ardent champions of the Aadhaar project. In 2016, an Aadhaar Act finally was brought to Parliament, and without it being sent to a standing committee, to a parliamentary committee, the parliamentary process for passing an act was also vitiated, also because the bill was passed as a money bill, which has also been challenged in court, because this bill cannot really be classified as a money bill. And then in 2016-17, actually what happened ended up helping change the way a wide section of the public perceived the program. Until then, it was really seen as something that helps the poor, which is the kind of propaganda that was coming from the government and the authority that was implementing this project. But in 2016-17, they started pushing to make it compulsory to link your mobile phone numbers to Aadhaar, and also to link your bank accounts to Aadhaar. And this then started affecting a lot of so-called middle-class people in India. And then they began to ask why their mobile phones needed to be linked to the Aadhaar number, or why their bank accounts needed to be linked to the Aadhaar number, and kind of perhaps started seeing through the false narrative that had been set up. And so I think the debate really then started to be much more about privacy. And like I said, the matter was already in the Supreme Court, and in 2017 and then in 2018, we had the right to privacy and the Aadhaar judgments. The right to privacy debate was, became such a big debate in the context of Aadhaar, because one of the main challenges to Aadhaar in the Supreme Court was that it violates the right to privacy. And the government's stand at that time was to clarify whether the right to privacy was constitutional or a fundamental right in India. And then it went to a 9-judge bench at the time. And thankfully, it was a unanimous decision in favor of the right to privacy. So, so this is just to give you a broad, trajectory of the project so far, or at least the way we see it. When the project was initiated around 2009-10, there was this kind of welfare facade. The way it was presented before the public was that this is something that will, that India's welfare state is too small and it's too exclusive, it leaves out many people, and that Aadhaar somehow would be the tool of inclusion, would allow people to suddenly and miraculously start accessing all these benefits. Another very important part of that narrative was that this was going to be a magic bullet, and these are the kinds of terms that they were using also, transformational and magic bullet and all of that, against corruption. So corruption is in fact quite a serious issue in some of the major welfare programs like the public distribution system, which provides subsidized food grain to a large part of the population, and also the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is like a workfare program and guarantees employment. Sort of the government steps in as employer of the last resort. And in both these programs and a bunch of others that we have, corruption is certainly an issue. But like I say, whether Aadhaar was a remedy to the corruption in these programs is very questionable. And it is because there was this important thrust on how Aadhaar would benefit these welfare programs, would help to expand the welfare network, is how I got interested in Aadhaar. And quite quickly, it was evident that they were totally clueless, but also barking up the wrong tree. So this slide sort of tries to help you understand why, to explain why those claims were flawed. So first thing they said is, people don't have IDs. And like I was saying earlier, only 0.03% of people who got Aadhaar use the introducer system, which is people who don't have any existing ID. So actually, the lack of IDs was not a barrier to accessing government benefits. The source of exclusion in these government benefits was really that there wasn't enough of a budget for these programs. The government wasn't setting aside enough money, and they were setting artificially or arbitrarily setting caps on how many people could access these benefits, whether it is social security, non-contributory pensions, or whether it is access to the public distribution system and to ration cards through which they buy subsidized grain. So that was one important source of exclusion. And kind of relatedly, the other source of exclusion is the misidentification problem, which is that when you run targeted welfare programs, then you have to identify the poor. And very often there are inclusion errors, which means that a non-poor person ends up being presented as eligible and corners these benefits. So this is sort of, I'm going into a bit of detail so that, just to make sure that everyone is convinced that, the Aadhaar is really not the remedy. So in the public distribution system, like I said, corruption is an issue. Even today, it was an issue, it remains an issue today. But here is a sort of broad typology of the kinds of problems that the PDS faces. One is eligibility fraud, which is that if you're not eligible, you manage still to get on the government list. So for instance, if you are a government employee, you're not supposed to get these ration cards. Can Aadhaar help solve that problem? No, because it's just a number, or it was supposed to be just a number, and just the number or the biometrics or a photograph or an iris scan cannot determine eligibility for any government program. The other one, is identity fraud, which is basic, or at least I've put them under the head of identity fraud because that's a commonly used term. And so what you have there is when people end up getting extra ration cards or extra benefits, or when people don't exist at all and somebody else, you kind of manufacture somebody and you manage to pull out money in their name. Again, this is the kind of thing where Aadhaar could have helped, but there are many ifs and buts along the way, and I won't go into that right now. But in the Q&A, if there's time, I'm quite happy to talk about it. Third is quantity fraud, and in our experience, this is the most important source of corruption in the PDS, which is that I'm supposed to get 35 kilos, but the person who's giving it to me understands that I'm powerless, understands that there is no grievance redressal mechanism. And so what they do is that they kind of force me to sign off on 35 kilos, but only give me 20 or 25 or whatever basically they feel like, or whatever they feel they can get away with. Now, in this case, Aadhaar can't really help, even if it is used in the way that they were envisioning it, which is that every month you go and you will authenticate yourself with your fingerprint, and only then can you get your ration. Now, if somebody can force me to sign off for 35 kilos and give me only 25 kilos, that same person can quite easily do the same with a biometric authentication mechanism through a POS machine, which is to force me to put my fingerprint and sign off on 35 kilos, but then continue to give me too little. So again, here Aadhaar didn't really have a role. Overcharging is another thing, which again Aadhaar can't help with. And quality of grain, when it's not good, these are not very serious issues now, but still they do exist. And but the fact is that there's no role really for Aadhaar. So I can do this kind of thing for each and every scheme that the government is planning to link up Aadhaar with and to use it, and the justifications are always the same. But the fact is that in fact there is very little that Aadhaar can do to weed out corrupt practices in those programs. So I think that really it was kind of like a sugar coating for something else, and I'll come to that at a later stage. So how is this Aadhaar-based biometric authentication, which we call ABA, supposed to work? There are 3 steps along the way, and now I'm kind of getting into the issues of where, in spite of the lack of justification, when the government has actually forced it down people's throats, what are the kinds of problems people end up facing when this is foisted on them. So what happens is, think of it as a hurdle race. So earlier, to reach your benefits, which is at the end line, you had to jump over many hurdles. You had to know about the existence of the scheme. You needed to know about your eligibility. You needed to then do the necessary paperwork. And then you needed to also be amongst the earlier applicants while there was enough fiscal space for you to get your ration card or whatever it is. And then you would reach the finishing line and claim your rations. What Aadhaar did is it put 3 more hurdles at the finishing line and moved the finishing line even further from people. So the first new hurdle that it added was enrollment, that people needed to have an Aadhaar number in the first place. Then they need to link that Aadhaar number to the PDS registry. And the third, so these 2 steps are supposed to be one-off steps, but actually they are not, and I'll explain. And then the third hurdle is that every month when they go to pick up their rations, they're supposed to authenticate themselves, which is a technological nightmare in many parts of rural India, because it requires a bunch of things to work at the same time. It requires that your fingerprint today is exactly the same as the image that was captured on the day that you enrolled in Aadhaar. It requires that the UID, the Aadhaar server is working. It requires that the food department server is working, because information about how much you're entitled to is supposed to be captured from there. And it requires that your internet connection and electricity or battery charge in the POS machine, the point of sale machine, all of these things have to work at that moment that you arrive at the ration shop for you to be able to claim your rations. Sorry, if there are questions, then I can't see them. No.
Ritika, I'll
Okay.
point those
Yeah.
out. I'll point
Yeah.
those out.
Sorry.
In case there are questions, I'll point those out to you.
Fine. Fine. Yeah. So like I was saying that, this is not really, enrollment and linking is, we have now learned, is not really a one-off kind of thing, because what happens is that when people enrolled, because of the model of enrollment that was employed, there was an incentive for the enrollers, private contractors, they were reimbursed on a per person basis. So they were just doing it any which way. They didn't care about accuracy of the demographic information that was being captured. And so if your name is misspelled, or if the spelling that is used on in your Aadhaar records doesn't match the spelling that is used in your bank account, then at the linking stage, you're going to trip up. Similarly, the linking itself is very problematic because, there are middlemen involved who will try to squeeze you for money, or the linking will trip up because of the demographic errors at the prior stage. So a lot of people, wherever I go now, not very often, but even through others, we hear that people are just all the time having to go to these middlemen to have these corrections made, to have their linking done, and they end up spending a lot of money. There are some government stipulated rates, but these people are unscrupulous. There is no scrutiny, there is no oversight mechanism, so they overcharge people, and it's a source of huge harassment. So even the bits that are supposed to be one-off are not really one-off, and it's really creating a problem because more and more aspects, more and more government programs are getting linked up with Aadhaar. So there's really nothing people can do without making sure that their Aadhaar thing works. And also, by the way, one of the big the rhetoric that was used is that this is going to cut out the middleman, but actually it's become a breeding ground for middlemen to kind of cheat poor people. So this is just to give you a sense of real people who've been affected by Aadhaar, just 3 or 4 case studies based on that survey we did in 2017. Rahel, she's a widow and she lives alone. She has this card which is meant for destitute people, the Antyodaya yellow colored card, but she hadn't received, we went in June 2017, but she hadn't received anything since November 2016 because she's been trying to get an Aadhaar number or card. She's gone multiple times with all her documents from her village to the district headquarters, but somehow hasn't been able to enroll. This young girl, 11-year-old, actually, this became a big issue in India because not only she died, there were others who died as well. And in her case, what happened is that the state government said that everyone must link their ration cards to their Aadhaar numbers by 31st July. Some deadline was given. And so after July, on August 15th, which is Independence Day in India, the chief minister of the state announced grandly in his speech, saying that the state had saved so many millions of rupees because of Aadhaar, because the way they functioned was that any ration card that was not linked to an Aadhaar number by 31st July was deemed to be a ghost. Yeah, so these are non-existent people who they were just like ghost entities and whose ration cards were cancelled. In fact, what turned out is that most of them, or a large number of them, were people who had not been told that they needed to link Aadhaar, or that Aadhaar linking had failed, and for whatever reason, they were actually real people who had been waiting for their rations, but who had been struck off the rolls because of this way of functioning that was used. And so in this case, of course, linking was the thing that tripped up the family, and Santoshi, she passed away because her school was closed. This was holiday time in October or September, and they didn't have any money. She was from a Dalit family. Here's another old lady, also tribal lady, who is a widow, and as you can see in her photograph, she's not mobile, so she can't really go to the ration shop anymore to claim her rations, and because of that, she is no longer able to get her benefits. This is another old man who's mobile, but his fingerprints have stopped working, and so he stopped getting his ration benefits. So even in government's administrative data, we can see, so it's not just a case of 5 or 10 or 20 people. You can see even in the administrative data that exclusion is high. And what this graph shows is when Aadhaar was introduced, what is the percentage of people who are able to successfully transact through this crazy mechanism in the western state of Rajasthan. And you can see that it increases from about 50% or just under 50%. It goes up to the best that they were able to do. This is old data. This is 2017. They were able to go to 88%. So there's a huge number of people who were not able to transact. Why they were not able to transact, we can't really tell from government data. They don't collect this kind of information. What we did do is in 2017, we did a systematic survey in the state of Jharkhand. And what we found is that there were many reasons for not being able to transact. And in the villages that were online, that were using this new ABA, the Aadhaar-based biometric authentication system, the transaction failure rate was much higher than in the offline villages where there was an exemption mechanism in place because of internet connectivity issues, etc. The other thing, sometimes people say that, oh, maybe they're not buying because they're not interested in grain. But in our sample, we didn't find that. We found that only 0.5% of those who were not buying were doing so because they were not interested. The other thing is, so this is the pain part of the story. Yeah, that there is pain to people. They are facing harassment and troubles. The time taken for these transactions has also gone up considerably, like I said, because of all these technologies having to work all at the same time. Half of the people in these villages reported experiencing POS, which is point of sale machine related issues. 60% said that it has made things more difficult, and just over 60, about 2/3 were saying that it should be discontinued. So that slide was really about the pain that people experience. Many are getting excluded, the time taken has gone up, and the number of failures have also gone up. But is the pain worth something? Is there something to gain from it? And what we find is that in terms of corruption, there is no gain. So before POS was introduced, before ABA was introduced, in the online villages, people got 93% of what they were entitled to. And after May 2017, when this was introduced, they're still getting 93% of what they're entitled to. And the difference between online and offline is, in fact, offline is doing marginally better. And another aspect is, this is from the point of view of those who get these benefits. This is from the point of view of the dealers, the people who run these shops. Earlier, they were able to finish off all their work in 4 days, but now they're also having to keep the shop open for many more days. So even their pain has gone up. So in a nutshell, and like I said, this is like one of the deep dive kind of parts of the story, because this is really the part that is within sort of what I think of as my domain of expertise. So there's a lot of pain, very little gain. What is good about the system can be achieved through other technologies. So if the biometric authentication and Aadhaar were replaced by smart cards, then we would still have the benefit of digital transactions being recorded and being monitored without the vulnerability to biometric failure or internet and server failures. And we feel that ultimately the way forward for the corruption in these programs and to improve their performance in general is to create greater awareness and to put in place strong grievance redressal mechanisms so that these problems can be remedied. And this is just the one last slide on the PDS, I think, which is to show that the improvement in the PDS which we have seen, predates Aadhaar. So Aadhaar started getting linked only from 2014 in a way that, people would be excluded if Aadhaar was not linked correctly. And this is the state of Bihar, which has the greatest or the highest leakage rates. It used to be, like I said, it was a very serious problem. So it used to be in the range of 90% leaking out, not reaching people. But around 2007-8, things started changing and there was a huge improvement in the functioning of the PDS. And this is really going back to some of what is in the second point, that there are other technologies and other ways in which other systems that have been put in place to reduce corruption levels in these programs. So again, now moving away from the welfare side of the story, what we saw, and also like going back to the bigger Aadhaar story, that, when they got caught out on some of these exaggerated or completely misplaced welfare claims, then they said, oh, no, Aadhaar will bring portability in the system. A person who buys her ration in the village should also be able to buy it in the city when she goes there to work. Then it became about financial inclusion and all the gains to financial inclusion from having this ID, because they also rammed it down the Reserve Bank of India's throat and made it acceptable for all kinds of things, even though there were some initial reservations there. Then they said, no, it's going to eliminate middlemen. They also claimed at some point that it's helping counter terrorism, tax evasion, all kinds of things. And some of these claims were made even in the court case because, they kept getting caught out. And one of the latest, this now, of course, the mask is off in a certain sense. And it's apparent, I think, to anyone who has paid attention to the project and the way it's gone, is that this is really about data, big data, data mining, etc. So I'll come back to that data story, which is like the new material, and thank you for bearing with me. I think for me, it's really hard to not talk about the propaganda aspect of Aadhaar, because, all over the world, I think it is being projected as, and has been quite successfully projected as, a huge success. But the way, like I said, in the case of that young girl who died, she, that was projected as a savings due to Aadhaar, but in fact, it was exclusion. And this is not just, like I said, a case of one or two people here and there. It's happening on a very massive scale, and it was happening all the time. These press releases were going from the government and being lapped up by media without any scrutiny. And so in everyone's mind, Aadhaar is associated with welfare and with savings and as something that has made people's lives better. And nothing could be further from the truth. So these are just a few examples of how, in different programs, the Social Security pensions, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is the workfare program, a study on LPG, which is cooking gas, the midday meal program. Again, people, when children don't link their Aadhaar numbers, they say, oh, look, we were able to knock off so many ghost beneficiaries. So it's it's like a playbook, which they use over and over again. One really interesting example of this propaganda is the role of the World Bank and the 2016 or 18, I can't remember now, World Development Report. It was called Digital Dividends. And in that report, they claimed that $2 billion had been saved because of Aadhaar in the LPG, the cooking gas program, and there was a potential to save $11 billion. And so we said, okay, let's see how they arrived at that estimate. And basically, we traced it back to this anthropologist's policy brief. And all she had said in that policy brief is that India's welfare spending is $11 billion. So, it's just like completely blatant and no scrutiny at all. And of course, if it's a World Bank press release, then everyone was, it was headline material and on the front page also. So the bigger, I guess, a more fundamental, to me, of course, the welfare objection is as serious as the privacy objection, but this is really one of the biggest challenges in the Supreme Court. There was, this whole phase of a debate around right to privacy, and I think some influential journalists were also trying to poo-poo the claim to right to privacy and say, this is just an elitist concern, etc. But I think now that attitude has changed a little bit, and the Supreme Court judgments certainly helped make it not cool to ridicule the right to privacy or to talk about it in this kind of way. So finally, in the last 5 or so minutes, let me talk about this new material or new thoughts that I've been having. So the thing is that, and I guess GDPR is part of this story, is that the potential of data mining and the kind of insights that we get from big data and artificial intelligence and all of that. I think some of it is exaggerated, but suppose it isn't. Suppose there are all kinds of things, benefits to be had from that, then one kind of narrative, one direction in which it goes is that there is a missing market for data, and that we need to put this market in place. We need to create a market for data, and that then people can decide whether they want to sell their data and make money from it. Because as Nandan Nilekani, who is the mastermind behind the Aadhar program, says, people are data rich before they are economically rich. And those who care about their privacy, they can choose not to participate. And so then that kind of becomes like treating privacy as a luxury good. So this is totally at odds with the right to privacy judgment, right? Because that is saying this is a fundamental right, whereas these people are saying, this is a luxury good for which people should either pay or should not participate in these markets. And so this line of reasoning has been slightly troubling. And as it happens, I've been reading some economic philosophers whose work is quite old now. So Hausman and McPherson, they have a paper in 1993, and they say that, in some cases, a non-market transaction is in fact more efficient, and efficient is this economic definition of efficiency, which is welfare enhancing, etc., etc. And the example that they gave is of blood donation, drawing on earlier work by Titmus and also Arrow, who's an American. And they had shown how having that blood donations are a better way, because if you make it a market where people can buy and sell blood, then there will be an incentive for those who are donating to also lie about whether, their blood is okay for donation purposes or not. And in fact, Titmus also makes this additional argument that if it is available for sale, then in fact, the supply of blood for people who need it may actually go down, because potential donors may feel, it's available, so people can just buy it, so why should I bother? So that's what triggered this kind of line of thinking. And I found the work of Deborah Satz quite helpful. So she characterizes some markets as noxious markets, and I'll come to that in the next slide. Then there's Michael Sandel, who says that, there's certain things should be kept out of market, out of the realm of the market. These transactions should not be market based, because in some cases there is a fairness argument, because some people may be too poor to be able to, resist selling either their kidney or their blood or whatever it is. But that's not a new argument that many others made before him. There's also something that he says, which is that sometimes it can have a degrading effect. That if, and he gives a whole bunch of examples. One of them is when people use their forehead or lease out their foreheads as advertising space, and they put some sticker or something on their head. And then Sam Bowles has another interesting insight, where he talks about whether market incentives can be relied upon to fix negative externalities from transactions in certain situations. So just to talk a little bit about Noxious Markets, which is Satz's work, she says that if a transaction is entered into due to vulnerability, then you could think of it as a noxious market. Then there is the weak agency problem, which is when you don't realize fully well the implications of your actions, or when someone else is acting on your behalf and it affects you. And I think both of these are relevant in data markets, or the market for privacy, which I think is more or less the same thing, because when you're sharing when your data is being harvested and mined, then actually it is your privacy that is at stake. And when you think of digital footprints and digital shadows, so shadows are when somebody else volunteers my information. So suppose I download an app and they say we'll give you a 50 rupee coupon if you refer a friend. Then first of all, I've created a digital shadow and I've passed on the phone number of a friend. So in her case, I've created a digital shadow and now she will start getting promotional messages. So my action is affecting her privacy. And I think both the vulnerability and the weak agency arguments apply in the case of these data markets. Then there is the problem, she says, of extremely harmful outcomes for individuals. So we know now, and there's so much documentation of how when you're surfing the internet, shopping online, using these apps, they can that data is being used to profile you and then to force or to manipulate your behavior, to push you, to nudge you into buying more or buying related items and so on. And then there are the extremely harmful outcomes for society, she says, which I think is also applicable in the case of these data markets, because now we know how Facebook has been using it to profile voters and influence their voting behaviors, or how some of these technologies are putting us into silos so that there's polarization in society and kind of conversation or discussion and debate, which is so essential for democracies, is becoming harder and harder to do. So SATS also actually talks about the work by T.H. Marshall. And, Marshall had said that things like education and health, these should be kept out of the realm of the market because these are preconditions to having equal status in society, which is itself a precondition then to having meaningful democracy. And if we think of the right to privacy also similarly as a basic right, which is helping us to preserve freedom of my thought and expression and, to participate equally as citizens, then then things that endanger it should also be viewed not as luxury goods or, things where you have to put the systems in place, a regulatory framework in place, whether it is a GDPR or a data protection law in India. I feel that that's not, that may not be particularly helpful. So SAT says she's not saying that if you decide that this is a noxious market, then the only thing is to ban it entirely. She says, it depends on the situation. In some cases, you can create alternative mechanisms for distribution. So like, the right to healthcare and right to education. Basically, it is seen in most countries, not in India, as the government's responsibility, but you can allow the coexistence of private hospitals and private schools. In some cases, a redistribution can fix the market failure that is evident. In others, regulation may do it, and then there might be some extreme cases where you may want to block or ban. And in the case of data and privacy markets, the preferred route has been regulation, but actually I think that regulation route has not really been particularly helpful at all. So in just some casual conversations, someone from Microsoft said that, it's just increased the cost of our operations. When there are fines on Google, like $57 billion or whatever it was, it sounds like, wow, we got even, but actually that is 0.1% of their annual revenues. And so basically these corporations just end up treating it as an operating cost, a cost of operation rather than actually remedying their behavior. So it doesn't act anymore as a disciplining mechanism on these corporations. So Yeah, so I'll stop with that. And so I in that piece, which I haven't really had the courage to circulate to too many people, I've called it putting markets. Should it be putting markets in place or should it be putting markets in their place? And the narrative is sort of as if markets are above everything else. That we shouldn't let any of these things like right to privacy come in the way of reaping the benefits that come from big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And I think that's the wrong way to view these things. And I'll stop with that.
Okay, thank you very much, Reetika. This was so thoughtful, so informative. I'll ask the audience to for questions if anybody has any questions. By the time people type or raise their hands, may I ask you about the seeding problem, which I think you mentioned in your book, which is from the place from where the whole point of using Aadhaar as a centralized system for collating our data comes in. Could you please say a few things about that?
So, do you mean to elaborate on the problem or to make that link more explicitly?
Yeah. If you could set that link, because I mean, UIDAI doesn't store our data, right? And any kind of use of Aadhaar is not stored in the UIDAI databases, but it still can be used. The Aadhaar numbers still can be used for collating our data. So,
yeah.
And that immediately raises the concerns around privacy. So if you could say a few more things.
Yeah. So, I think the UIDAI server itself only has the demographic details and a biometric data. But once the number is put in the public distribution database, in the NREGA database, in the scholarships database, in the mobile numbers, and there is no scrutiny or no regulation over what they do with this. So sometimes they're actually selling the data. Some of these people, there's a whole bunch of private entities involved. There's nobody looking at what they do. And sometimes the data is leaking because they don't have security. And I think I saw Kiran, who has, he has expertise in some of these things. So then once it goes from the hands of the food department or from the social welfare departments, and it ends up in the market, then it's a thriving business, right? We know that the people are buying and selling data, and linking up using the Aadhaar number is like a godsend for them, right? I use databases all the time. And if there is a unique ID, linking up the census data with the national sample survey data, it's like, thank God, it makes my job a lot easier. So I can see why they're salivating at the opportunity. But there seems to be no, it's like as if they're not able to see beyond those things at the bigger picture. So the linking up problem, the profiling is happening by accident, by design, and sometimes because there are data breaches as well.
Thanks, Reetika. So Kiran just wrote in the chat that many government entities publish Aadhaar numbers of beneficiaries as part of their transparency initiative. So Nandita, I think Nandita has a question.
Hello. Yes, Sanjay. Thank you. Hello, Reetika. I'm Nandita. I'm one of the PhD student. I just, first of all, it was a really good, very interesting talk. Just wanted to ask about the last slide you had on your, I think you spoke about that GDPR is kind of now the preferred method, but you did not, or you might have talked and I have missed. I just wanted to know what are your views on the other things you wrote about redistribution and other things. So yeah, I just wanted to know about how do you really think that if the regulatory frameworks are not working right now, and as that is not the preferred method. What other things do you think are?
So, like I said, I'm sort of fresh to thinking about these things carefully. See, regulation is not particularly helpful because, you know, even if we have a data protection law, will I know my rights? Will I know who to go to? And to have them enforced, going to court is such a punishment, even if you are in a position to be able to do it. Besides regulation, we have not seen much. I mean, even the other things that we have seen which could be helpful are part of the regulatory framework. Yeah, so like things, people like Bruce Schneier, who writes about these issues, and he says data is a toxic asset. He will say, collect less, you know, put limits on what data can be asked for, what can be collected. But even that, I mean, even with online shopping, right? If you don't give your phone number for verification, then you can't buy that product. So if you can't hold one online thing to account, how are you going to hold larger corporations to account also? So maybe this is something for other people also to think about, but I thought at least let me say that there is a different way, or there should be a different way in to think about these issues, and that we are being told that this is an inevitable consequence, that we, you know, the data mining is here, data is here, digital is here, and now there is all this money to be made, and so now let's just do some kind of damage control or something that seems like damage control. And I think that is the problem. But what are the, should we ban it? I mean, I'd love to say it, but everyone will say she's cuckoo.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no. Obviously, all these things are going to stay. And then, yeah, you told that. I mean, obviously, regulatory framework is a big part of the whole situation. That would be there. So I was just thinking when you said redistribution of the data. So what actually you meant by redistribution of the data?
No, so I wasn't saying we should redistribute. She's saying that in some cases, that if there are these negative externalities, then redistribution can be, so, you know, the polluter pays kind of principle. In those contexts, I mean, I think even that is problematic, and I think she probably thinks that too. But there might be certain contexts in which the ones who are suffering the damage can be compensated. So in that sense, some kind of redistribution. But I don't think that works for something like the right to privacy, right? If you think that sharing data is compromising your right to privacy, then even redistribution isn't helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Nandita. So Kiran, I see, has made two more comments. So her first comment is there has been a long-term confusion on whether Aadhaar numbers are public, private, or secret. They are definitely not secret like a password is, but the distinction between public and private is also disputed. Then she also adds, for instance, the Aadhaar Act says they are private, and publishing an Aadhaar number is an offensive offense with penalties. However, the first director of UIDAI, Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma, regularly makes public statements asserting that Aadhaar numbers should be public and that they are private only because noisy privacy activists. Kiran, would you like to, yeah, maybe say these things here? Yourself, I mean.
Hey, sorry, I'm on the road, so this may be noisy. Hopefully I'm audible.
Sure, you are.
But, essentially, yes. So what's happened is, you know, this distinction of whether Aadhaar number is public or private or secret is confusing, and everybody has their own opinion about it. For one, it's not secret, it's not a password. It is meant to be shared, but shared in a private context. The problem is this idea of what is a private context is not defined in the Aadhaar Act. It is not defined in the architecture. It is left to the implementation to decide what private means. And usually private means you write it down on a piece of paper and make an application with it. And then that gets filed away somewhere. Sometimes it gets scanned and the copy gets thrown away. And so what will happen is that if you go to any typical government office and take a snack from a snack vendor outside, it'll come wrapped in an Aadhaar number. Because they simply throw away those papers and then they're reused in public. And you could simply steal identities by standing outside a government office and taking the trash. And so this is because nobody defined what private means. They didn't define that private means it should not be treated so lightly, it should not be thrown away, it should not be left in a public place. So this is one of the deficiencies of the Aadhaar Act, and part of the reason is there is this internal dispute between UIDA, some of the members. Some of the members think it should have been private. Some, like Mr. R. Sharma, are very vocal that private is a bad idea in this country, it should be public. And unfortunately, because of their internal disputes, we're left with no clarity on what it is supposed to be. Is it private? Is it public? If it is private, what does private mean? How do you handle it safely? How do you make sure you don't leak it? How do you avoid use without authentication and so forth? All of these are unknowns, and we've never been interested in answering these questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kiran. I think we didn't get a chance to touch upon the question of consent, because the moment we talk about right to privacy, the question of consent is there to come up, right? So can you say a few things about that, Reetika?
Yeah, so like I said, this voluntary and mandatory thing has been a bone of contention right from the beginning. And actually at one point I was making this whole Aadhaar Speak dictionary based on Newspeak that Orwell had. And basically in their Aadhaar Speak, savings mean exclusion and voluntary means mandatory. So there is no consent. You can't get your rations or your employment opportunities through the Employment Guarantee Act if you don't agree to putting your Aadhaar print, the footprint or whatever it is all over the place. But even in the data markets, which is the new stuff that I'm talking about, this consent is really meaningless, right? Actually, the meaning of consent is informed consent, that I understand that this is why you're asking for my data and this is what you're going to do with it. But a lot of the time, the people who ask for our data themselves are just harvesting it because they think one day there will be some use for it. And one of the reactions to that, there is a lawyer, Rahul Mathan, who's written a book called Privacy 3.0, I think, who is supposed to be a lawyer who thinks seriously, who takes privacy seriously. So he's not supposed to be ridiculing the right to privacy. And he says that, this consent-based model has failed, which is, there is fatigue, nobody reads the privacy policies, you just say, yeah, agree, just get on and get the new app. And meanwhile, you've allowed them access to your contacts, your media, your battery charge. Apparently, Uber is also monitoring how much battery charge you have and then using surge pricing if your battery charge is low. At least those allegations have been made. And he says, no, let's not talk. This consent-based model is a failure and we have to think about it as data rights. And we have to create, and then that goes towards the creation of a market and all that. And I think in that market, there are efficiency concerns, there are equity concerns, and there are the four things that, or other things that SATS is talking about, which is that there are harmful consequences both to the individual and to society. And there is the lack of agency or the taking away of my agency, because you could be sending me a gift and revealing to whoever is delivering, say Amazon, my home address, right? So this is a data shadow where consent ka to baat hi, there's no question of consent.
Could you add something about the use of the data? Like, can this data be given to other organizations by the government or whoever owns it?
Yeah, so the government is supposed to be in, so both, this is not only a private sector problem, this is also a public. The government is now holding a lot of data in fiduciary capacity. And last year in Parliament, they admitted that they had sold motor vehicle registration data for some few crore rupees, I can't remember. And it's totally crazy. They're not supposed to be doing this. This is like purposefully, intentionally selling. But like Kiran was saying earlier, there are many government databases online. So there is this tension between right to privacy and right to transparency, right? But I think it was Usha who perhaps first said it, that instead of the state being transparent to us, we are being made transparent to the state, which is totally wrong.
Okay, thank you once again, Reetika, for all the comments. Do we have any more questions? So I realize that we have already overshot the time, but that's fine if you have more questions.
Some hand has gone up.
Yes, yes, Amzad.
Yeah, hello, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
you are.
Professor. I am also on working on market modulation works like Deborah Sarge and Michael Sandel's on what should be the moral limits of market in terms of all these market modulation argued that the market mechanism is not appropriate to distribute the sum of goods and services. Then I am puzzled with what should be the appropriate value to distribute the goods and services, and how you would connect the data mining concern or the case with the distribution things, or the if we want to exclude the market from the data sharing or the data mining, then how state and citizens will contact each other for the distribution and goods for the goods and services. Then what should be the appropriate method?
So should I collect? There was another hand, but I'll just quickly try to respond to this. So I think in the case of healthcare in England, there is the National Health Service, which is getting privatized bit by bit. But for many decades, it has been government provided outside the market mechanism and has worked very well. And it, NHS is not the only example. Even I think Australia has publicly provided health services, directly provided health services. Another model for non-market is social health insurance, which is what Canada has. And thirdly, there are also cooperative mechanisms for making goods and services available. So in the Indian case, Amul, of course, is the most well-known example of how cooperative, I mean, it ruled the market, so non-market, market, whatever, but it was not a profit-based model. So both social insurance and cooperatives don't necessarily have to be profit-oriented models, but have been very successful on scale. But in the case of data, I think I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that at least let's frame the debate in the correct way. Let's at least frame it to understand the importance of the right to privacy in a democracy, and then to understand how these technologies are undermining the right to privacy. And I have not read it properly, but I think Shoshana Zuboff is kind of making similar argument, or but she says things which I read and then I say, this is exactly right. So one of the things she says that, we are being made to believe that this is an inevitable thing. Okay? We just have to find a way to adjust ourselves in this juggernaut. But what I'm arguing for is that at least let's reframe the debate and then have it on those different terms, and then maybe people will react differently and come up with better solutions.
Sure, thank you. Vineet?
Yeah, Hi Ritika. So I'm Vineet. I am a lecturer here and also a member of the ICSSSU. So thanks for this very nice talk. I was just wondering, so there is also a different notion of privacy, which is called as the differential privacy, and it kinds of sort of encourages you to participate or share your data in the sense that this notion actually says that okay, you can give me your data and then I can like give some approximate answers, like I can add some noise to the query, to the result of the query, making sure that if you hadn't participated in the survey, then your answer would pretty much like up to some approximation would be the same as if you would have participated. So essentially giving you a guarantee that whether you are there in the data or not, the answers would pretty much remain the same. So it's a different notion of privacy, which sort of reconciles or encourages you to participate, right? It's not as black and white like the notion of privacy which you talked about. So it's kind of in the middle of those. So I was just wondering if you have thought about these notions of privacy or not.
Yeah, so I think one of the persons in the field of computer science whose work I really like, but perhaps I haven't read enough of, is Arvind Narayanan at Princeton, Random Walker on Twitter. At
Yes,
least
yes.
he is a computer science guy who totally gets privacy. So, and I think he has written about differential privacy. He has at least one or two papers on differential privacy. And I am not right now able to see whether that would be a satisfactory way forward, because I think he also has different applications in mind. But I should revisit his work. Basically, that's what I'm saying. But thanks for reminding me about his differential privacy stuff and other people, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I think I'm trying to be provocative a little bit to see if people throw stones at me.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, so Kiran just added that differential privacy is too new for Aadhaar. It's not well established enough to experiment on a vulnerable population. So, I mean, the point of differential privacy, I think, is that I mean, we have to move from the existing system, the databases that are already present, and provide the differential privacy interface to it. Yeah, so I certainly agree that this is too nascent a technology. Of course, I don't really understand much of it, but the little that I do, I think it's very new.
I'll just quickly add that, I think the social context in which these technologies are being unleashed, I feel those who see the benefits should first fully understand the society in which they work. Like even my mother, no, she's educated. She's not like, she's perfectly capable and all that, but she will be swindled like this if everything becomes digital. And she will also be disempowered like in a snap. The other day, I met my 82-year-old aunt who needed to get these new license plates in Delhi, which have become compulsory, and she was fined 20,000 rupees or something. And so she was then trying to get the number plate, the new number plate. It's only online. Now, she is also someone who's very capable, but she couldn't handle the online application procedure. So this is one example of where it becomes the only method of operating. You close off all the other routes of working and you make this the, provided a monopoly because you want to harvest data, right? So you're putting your interest of harvesting data over the convenience of the citizen, over the rights of the citizen even. And then similarly, in terms of, whether I will understand how to navigate in a world of a differential privacy, I can't say right now, but I can certainly tell you that this Olasi Hansta and Santoshi Kumari's mother and all of these people, they are unlikely to be able to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Ritika, once again. So, okay, so we have one more. I think Usha, yes, please.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Reetika, because it's useful to hear in which direction you're headed. I just thought thought since you said it's about, setting the terms of the debate, if I can just throw in a few things, and if they work within, within what you're seeing as setting the terms, then it could be put in. One is that all these projects that are coming up, whether it is the UID or anything that's linked to that UHID, farmers database, everything getting linked up with everything else. Ridiculously, the latest law on surrogacy saying that we will produce anonymity, so you register it with your UID. So this, I would suggest, was at one level, it was about creating a resource. So we've had land as a resource, we've had water as a resource, we've had, all these are to be exploited according to the, according to a certain kind of economics. And so we've had a number of those, and now we find that data is the new resource. So when they say data is the new oil, I think it really needs to be seen a little differently too. And if we go into the history of what oil did, I don't think we want to, maybe we need to understand that. But the point is that through this UID number and through the ubiquity in putting it in every database and using that to convert a lot of people into data, where they are saying that you be presenceless, but let your data be visible, they are working at creating a resource, which kind of explains where they go from there, where they say data is public good. Data has to contribute to the economy being built up. Data has to trickle up. People may not have wealth. So all about creating this new resource. So the data, they are not relevant or important anymore. Sorry, you can't hear me?
Your voice keeps going away in between.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you can lip read for a bit now. I put the camera on if it comes on. The second thing is that, there is this, data is at one level in terms of the market, but at another level, what the corporates have sold to the government is that you can surveil everybody, know everything about everybody at any point in time. So can we think of all of this without thinking about the relationship between the state and corporate interests in terms of compatibility of interest between these two entities? And with people becoming the objects of this whole exercise. The third is it possible to think about all these changes that are coming in without acknowledging the level of disdain that this shows for people? So it's not just an economics thing. Unless you're able to factor into it, this contempt for people, people can be told what to do, people just have to do it. People are corrupt, people are this, people are that. Actually, and it's fascinating because the first 10 years of this century, all the scams that we saw had three parties in it, which were people in politics, people in the bureaucracy, and corporate entities. Today, they want to control all our data. So it's a fascinating kind of thing where within 10 years, you turn fact and sense on its head. So whether this has any ability at all to enter an economic debate, I'm not quite sure if it does. And the last thing that I'll just say for now, and then we'll continue the discussion between us, is this thing of national security. And it was very interesting because today in another talk that was given by Puneet on privacy, he kind of said that there are 4 ways in which national security can be looked at. So a real threat to national security, a reasonable apprehension of national security, perceived threat of national security, and fabricated threat of national security. And the only thing that can really allow for even a minor dilution of the right to privacy can be a real threat to national security. All the rest are excuses for taking away the right to privacy. So now the national security debate is actually at the center of many of these things that we're dealing with. So even financial insecurity has been shown, say, during the emergency and after there being some kind of a major problem that can result in an emergency being brought down on people. And the only job of a state actually is to protect our rights. So how do you reconcile all these, conflicting things together? Because none of it allows for a project like the UID, or for a kind of institution like the UID AI, or for a person like R.S. Sharma to be anywhere in policy making.
So I agree with you. This, I think in the Cambridge Analytica piece, I had said how this Aadhaar project is basically like a marriage of convenience between the state and private corporations. And that's why the subtitle of the book, no, Big Data Meets Big Brother. But yeah, thanks for the comments and I'll think about it. It's just, I've put in the chat box how, like, I was happily sitting in my development economics silo, and then Aadhaar came along, and then I had to start thinking about and talking, or at least thinking about privacy. And now I'm reading all these economic philosophers. So anyway, I will apply my mind a bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Usha. Thanks, Reetika, once again. Do you have any more questions? If not, then thank you very much, Reetika, once again for taking out time from your busy schedule and giving this talk, and then the following discussions. Very engaging, very important. Yeah, so thank you very much once again, and thanks to the audience for joining in. I hope this provokes us to think more about the issues around Aadhaar and digital IDs in general, centralization of data, implications to privacy, and so on. Thank you, everybody. Have a very nice day. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.